to all of you, particularly Dr. Balakrishna, our speaker for the day. This, like I was saying in our informal chat before we began, makes a big departure from what we have been doing in the Literature of Sustainability series, which is the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies effort to bring together literary studies and the Sustainable Development Goals. Because we have today with us a policymaker. So we have been reading, talking and discussing a lot about literary texts. We thought we should get somebody who will tell us a little bit more about policy and sustainable development goals. Dr. Pispati, we are honored to have you with us. He's the country head for the United Nations Environmental Program. We are also delighted to have the scientist from the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, Professor Erin Rao. And one of our future speakers, Dr. Stacey Balkan. Welcome to all of you, all friends who join regularly. I'll now hand you over to, all right, instead of waiting for Atul to get his connection back, allow me to step in. We are deeply honored to have with us Dr. Balakrishna Pispati, a very well-known conservationist and development specialist with numerous responsibilities over the years, and he currently is head of the country head of the United Nations Environmental Policy. He's also Vice Chancellor, Transdisciplinary University of India, Chief of Biodiversity, Land and Governance Programs at the United Nations Environmental Program in the past in Kenya. He has been Senior Policy Fellow, Chairman, National Biodiversity Authority, Government of India. And if I were to read all the things he has been, I don't think we'll have his talk today. But enough to say that we have a brilliant policymaker and scientist to tell us a little bit more about policies connected to SDG 6. Over to you, Dr. Pisupati.
Brilliant. And just to confirm, you can hear me once again, Professor Nair.
Yes, yes.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And as you mentioned, probably not so many. It's an uncommon opportunity for me to be here speaking to several of you because, working, with policy, working on issues of governance. You tend to have a very different kind of an audience compared to academic audience. But then personally for me, this is something which I always enjoyed, which I always cherished, because the very starting point for policy making is science. When I say science, it's just not biological, it's all the sciences, because it's the science that informs policy making. So if you actually are very clear of what the science says, what the assessments say, which are normally based on science, that's where the starting point for us or policymakers to come in to actually understand how to deal with the signals or the key messages that the science is telling us. And environment is no exception to that. And certainly, if you look at the whole genesis or the progression of environment policy making, environmental governance, to a large extent, it is based on science. Not just the modern science, but also to a large extent supported and informed by traditional science. Traditional knowledge, traditional practices, and a number of different things on a range of issues, whether it is related to food security, whether it is related to water sanitation, whether it is related to climate adaptation, mitigation, whatever sort of you say, because communities and people have actually evolved with nature. And in fact, I was just telling Professor Nair that today morning I happened to be in an event where I was speaking, which is called Yamuna Manthan. In India, Yamuna is one of the important and sacred rivers that flows, in Delhi, but heavily polluted. A number of different things are happening to ensure that we revive it. And then at that conference, I just had a quote that is quite, close to my heart, that said that, humans actually, we have worked for a couple of centuries to conquer nature, but we actually had spent the last several decades, beating it to death. So when it comes to environmental management, environmental protection, environmental governance, certainly a number of challenges exist, but largely guided by human behavior, largely influenced by human behavior in the way we are responding to both individual developments, pressures, and also collective community, and national development pressures. And a lot of these challenges are not just unique for one country. This is actually, something which a lot of countries have faced. Some of them were able to actually invest in appropriate times, in appropriate scales, and in appropriate interventions, that they're able to overcome some of it. So they're able to manage to bring back nature to the way they actually wanted to enjoy nature. But in a complex country like India, we still have a number of challenges and a number of problems, in spite of the investments that we are making. When I say investments, it's just not financial investments. It is also the intellectual investments. It is also the investments that goes into activities, goes into capacities, goes into technologies, and a number of different things. But of course, if we are going to be talking about the area of watersheds, and in general, those issues that are related to the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, it's all the more important because water becomes a very fundamental component of the human survival. And all the civilizations, as probably many of you are aware as academics, would realize that the evolution of civilizations was is largely influenced by water. So it's the water bodies and the rivers and streams and a lot of those kinds of things that, to an extent, seeded a number of communities, a number of cultures, a number of civilizations to flourish. And certainly it is under tremendous pressure because of our own consumption patterns, our own sort of use and misuse, or sometimes abuse of the resource. So what I'd like to do is to spend the next 15-20 minutes in terms of giving you a bit of an overview of what this SDG 6 is all about, and why are we discussing it, and what is that we actually have been doing. And in fact, it's just about a few days from now that countries around the world are going to be meeting in New York under what is called the High Level Political Forum. It's called HLPF in short. It's an annual event, not a decision-making body, but a body that actually brings countries together to do a quick voluntary review of what countries are doing to achieve different elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in fact, in this year, India is going to be presenting its voluntary national report, because not every year countries present their reports. It's actually required once, only 3 times in a span of 15 years, between 2015 and 2030. So India is presenting its report card on what it is doing in terms of achieving SDG 6. So that's a little bit of a background and an overview. And if you allow me, I'll sort of, I have a short presentation that I'd like to pull up, and just bear with me as we do it. Yes. And just confirm that you can see the presentation. And well, thank you. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, what I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of a overview of SDG 6, but then also within that, intertwine the global and the Indian specific progress, challenges, opportunities, and target year for achieving SDG 6, as all of us know, being 2030. Next one, please. Right. Okay. Actually, I had a bit of an animation, but it doesn't matter. So it's sort of for those of you who work in the area of water, many of those points sometimes I'm sure you're familiar. But certainly there are some of these points that are very critical in the context of, number one, designing the SDGs the way they are designed, setting the targets, and also coming up with a number of indicators to support the targets to be achieved in terms of progress being made. But some of those that you see on the screen are very important and a little startling facts. That a very simple issue of hand washing saves more lives than any vaccine. And certainly for that, we can't say we will sort of use the sanitizer, but it's more the simple plain water that actually saves more lives than any vaccine. A leaking tap can waste 1 bathtub of water every day, and that's sort of per day per person kind of thing. The flush toilet is one of the most water intensive devices. Groundwater in India is the largest drinking water source, given the geography, given the sort of environmental conditions, and also the dependency of many parts of India in terms of rain, in terms of recharge, and also the way the seepage happens and things like that. Growing a kilogram of rice needs 2,500 liters of water. More people have mobile phones than toilets. Water pollution kills more people. Water scarcity affects mental health. So, I mean, a certain sort of background to why we are discussing it in the context of now development and development pressures today. The next slide, please. Of course, there are 8 targets associated with the Sustainable Development Goal number 6 with 11 indicators. And those targets cover a number of things that are related to ensuring sustainability of water, water management, water resources. And they cover issues such as access to safe and affordable drinking water, adequate sanitation and hygiene, improvement of water quality, efficient management of water, protecting water-related ecosystems. And the targets also include a number of means for implementation, like international cooperation and capacity building. But also, very interestingly, even though we are discussing water in the context of SDG 6, as many of you probably are aware, there is no way any country can achieve any of these SDGs independent of actions or implementation of the other SDGs. So for achieving SDG 1, SDG 2, SDG 3 on health, for example, SDG 6 is very important. For achieving environmental SDGs, SDG 13 on climate change, 14 on life below water, 15 on life on terrestrial ecosystem, water is important. So to an extent, a lot or all of these SDGs are interconnected, and that is both an opportunity, but it is also a challenge. And that is why in the context of Sustainable Development Goals and the progress that is being made, the way countries are encouraged to work on looking at the progress is being made is something which to an extent is very clearly put together in SDG number 17 that looks at partnerships, where we have a target that looks at encouraging countries to work on policy coherence. Unless there is going to be policy coherence, a number of these kinds of interlinkages cannot be achieved. And my recent, the most immediate responsibility before I moved to India about 6 or 7 months ago was exactly to lead UNEP's work on policy coherence to help countries deal with integrated policy making, policy alignment, and things like that. The next slide, please. Of course, as I mentioned, there are several key elements that the SDG 6 focuses on. One is universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water. It's just not about having access, but it is having equitable access. Access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene, improving water quality, water use efficiency, but also water-related ecosystems. So those are some of the areas that the SDG 6 covers. The next slide, please. But then there are a number of challenges actually in terms of, and also remember that even though we are discussing all of it in the context of SDGs, activities related to water protection, management of water resources, sanitation, hygiene, all of it was something which actually are not new. Many countries, many ministries of environment, many scientists and civil society organizations have been working on water-related issues for decades. But what the SDGs and its previous version, the Millennium Development Goals or MDGs, have done is to provide a framework within which countries come together and agree on collectively what needs to be done. Even though a number of investments are made at the local level, at the province level, at the federal level, collectively what needs to be done so that some of these issues can be looked upon in the context of global commons, in the context of resources for the humankind. It's quite a recent phenomenon that we have been discussing about many of this. But then the activities related to some of these is something which has been there or happening for a number of I would say decades or even centuries. But then there are still some challenges related to achieving SDGs in general. Many of you would have heard this term saying that it's very uneven progress that is being made, and the way things are happening, we may not be able to achieve all the SDGs as countries have wished for in 2015 when they've agreed for the SDGs for a number of different reasons. But the first reason being inadequate funding and investments. And this actually is, again, not just relevant to India, but it is actually a global challenge. So if you're going to be looking at the numbers, it will be quite interesting to see the numbers in terms of the requirements, but at the same time, what is actually available. But what is really sort of interesting in many of these investments when it comes to environmental management and governance or governance of these resources is the fact that whenever investments are being made, the prioritization in general that is being done, whether it is from public sector or private sector, is to actually look at how we as humans, lead our lives with much more comfort and much more convenience than looking at it from a sustainability viewpoint. In fact, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we celebrated the World Environment Day that are focused on ending plastic pollution. And if you look at the problems that plastics have created have created, to an extent, all of it is man-made because we actually wanted things to be more convenient than before. So convenience is certainly a very, very important, factor in the way we actually have shaped a number of these problems, and certainly it is going to stay with us for some time to come. Inadequate funding and investments are important because, any country, and I'll give you some numbers in a minute, the amount of investments definitely are happening. But again, those investments are disjointed, those investments are repetitive, and those investments are being made at a time in a scale which certainly may not have larger impact, especially at the national level. And this is what is creating quite a bit of a challenge. The second point of it, which again is to an extent present or a challenge faced by many countries, is poor governance and fragmented institutions. In a country like India today, if you're going to be asking about things, if somebody is going to say, do we have data and information on how to manage our water resources, sanitation and hygiene? Yes, we do. Do we have institutions that actually can help us understand the challenges and overcome the challenges? We do. Do we have the policy and regulatory frameworks that actually can help us overcome these challenges and hurdles? We do. Do we have enough money to deal with some of these challenges and overcome these challenges? We do. So we actually have a number of these things that could enable or facilitate us to overcome the challenges. But the problem is that a lot of them are fragmented, a lot of them have a very, very serious governance issues. In fact, end of March, UNEP and the National Green Tribunal, which is a very, very important statutory body in India, we organized a national conference on environmental management. And one of the sessions was focusing on water and water resources. And very clearly, the message was exactly that. The executive have their interests and have their approaches. The civil society have their approaches, have their interests. Academia have their approaches, have their interests. And judiciary actually depends on a number of these players to actually come up with their own interpretation of what needs to be done to protect the environment. So certainly the key and missing element of all of it is fragmentation of institutions. And this is where the policy alignment, the policy coherence, the need for looking at integration or coherence or synergies, both vertically and horizontally, comes to play an important role. Climate change is a huge stress on water availability and quality. Many of us are aware of it. And again, some of you would have followed the discussions that happened in Bonn a couple of weeks ago during the mid-year annual events under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Certainly, a number of challenges, do remain, and we seem to have crossed the 1.5 degrees centigrade, target that we have set for ourselves, or countries have set for themselves, given the kind of problems or challenges countries are facing in the context of climate change, both for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and things like that. So certainly climate change has a huge impact on water, and that is where the coherence is something which is very important. Pollution is a huge element, is a huge challenge from industrial components, agricultural components, and domestic sources. And this is something where, in spite of having the policies, in spite of making large investments, in spite of we knowing the science of how to manage the resources, sanitation, hygiene, and all of it, we definitely will have a huge, challenge to overcome, because the pollution that happens from each of them, industry, agriculture, and domestic use, is something which, to an extent, in a country like India, we still have challenges of how to control them, how to overcome them, because mainly our ability to work both in terms of consumption and in terms of behavior of managing the resources is something which is a big challenge. And the last point is inequities in access among rural and marginalized communities. Many of us are aware of it, and today, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if somebody is going to be asked on where does the drinking water come from, they'll say a tap or a borewell. But today, you ask any sort of youngster or a kid on where water comes from, they're going to say it comes from a plastic bottle or from a water bubble. Because we completely have lost that ability to actually relate what we are doing in terms of water for drinking purposes, for domestic use, which still is a major issue. The next one, next slide, please. So this actually is a kind of an estimate based on research that to achieve SDG 6, we require a global investment of 114 billion per year, which is to an extent, if you're going to be looking at how much of money is being spent on a number of different things, it's not a big amount of money. But the actual investments that are going in on an annual basis is less than one third of what is required, approximately about 40 billion per year, including on aid and domestic budgets. So this actually is something which is a big challenge, especially for developing countries, especially for many countries in different continents in the world, where their inability to actually invest in a number of these things is something which is pulling us back from achieving components of SDG 6 on clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. The next one, please. So are there any opportunities to accelerate the progress? Many opportunities. Of course, investing in water infrastructure and maintenance. A number of things are already happening in the context of water infrastructure and maintenance. Integrated water resource management. A number of institutions actually are working on integrated management of water resources in terms of watersheds and a number of things. Expanding the nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. This actually has received a lot more of investment and attention in the recent years, though not very optimal. But certainly this particular component, especially at the local and sub-national level, is something which is actually low-hanging fruit for many governments and many countries to use in terms of managing the issue of water, sanitation, and hygiene. Strengthening data systems and monitoring. Today we are sitting with the technology that is available, artificial intelligence, big data analytics, Internet of Things, and a number of those things which can transform the way we are managing our water resources. But of course, for them to be actively considered and actively put into use in terms of overcoming these challenges and translate them into opportunities is to actually make investments not just in the technology, but also understand which component of the technology is going to be useful for what purpose. You can't use the same thing for everything. And that is where I say that when it comes to technological interventions, today we have answers to a number of questions, but we don't know the questions. So that is where actually the technology, data-driven systems and monitoring comes into important role. And lastly, partnerships across sectors and across borders. And I'm sure for those of you who follow the water agenda would recognize that always it is quoted, not just recently, but almost for the last several decades, that if there is going to be a next world war, it is going to be on water. So water actually is a very important issue, not just within the national boundaries, but it is also a huge element of transboundary cooperation, transnational cooperation. And that is where having appropriate partnerships across borders is also critically important. A number of examples already exist, for example, from Africa and parts of Latin America, parts of Asia. And in fact, we have now started to experience or see the impacts of some of them, even within countries like India, in terms of the provinces or the states trying to have discussing challenges in terms of sharing water resources. And in fact, in the morning today, as I mentioned, when I was at the Yamuna, which is an important river in India, discussions, we realized that different states actually have different ways of managing that particular resource, which is causing a lot of stress on the resource itself. The next slide, please. Is India doing something? A lot, including in terms of investments and a number of government schemes. What you see on the screen actually are some representational initiatives or programs and the timelines and the budgets that are there and the focus of some of these schemes. We have a national mission called the Jal Jeevan Mission. We also have a national Swachh Bharat mission or Clean India mission. a huge program running with an investment of almost 2.4 billion, just focusing on one important river for India, Ganga, the Namami Gange mission, the Amrit program with about 34.7 billion, the National Hydrology Project. But these are just samples to know. But then if you look at some of it, even though a lot of these investments are going on in a country as complex as India, both in terms of its diversity, but also in terms of the socio-cultural and economic aspects of it, still more is required. And that is where I always prefer to have a lot of these discussions in terms of investments, not just only focusing on the quantum of finances available, but also the impact of these finances that we have in terms of changes that can happen, both in terms of policy making, but also in terms of human or the citizens based behavioral change or their participation in terms of translating these challenges into opportunities to come. The next slide, please. So this is where we are. We are growing, we are developing. It's a great sort of that the cartoon in itself is something which is going to be revealing, and you can pick it up that we have all the infrastructure, but then we need water. We need options for sanitation and hygiene, and this is something which is going to be an extremely important element for a country like India to focus on. Not just only look at development for the context in the context of development, but also development in the context of our ability to invest in nature and natural resources so that our future generations can also be prosperous. The next one, please. So, country like India, water quality is an issue, groundwater depletion is an issue, urban water supply and sewage infrastructure. There are a number of gaps, inequitable access and regional disparities, climate variability impacting monsoon patterns. A lot of it are quite complex sort of issues, but then together they are really sort of pulling a number of things back, and that is where investments in local infrastructure, investments in understanding from the local communities on how they actually can manage, how they can sort of change their behavior, change their consumption patterns, change their ability to deal with sanitation and hygiene is something which is going to be very, very important. The next slide, please. So what could be the potential opportunities and the recommendations? As I mentioned, scaling up community-led water management and conservation. This is so very critical. And we have seen case studies after case studies, examples after examples, how at the local level, many parts of the world, many continents, people are able to manage the resource much more sustainably if communities actually are provided with an opportunity and also the ability to manage their resources and conserve these resources and ensure that sanitation and hygiene is more a bottoms-up investment or a bottoms-up approach in terms of having an impact at the national and global levels. We also need to work on expanding the grey water treatment and reuse systems, which certainly is inadequate in a country of complex and size and around technologies in terms of investments, where we still have not optimally used that element of recycling and reuse of water. And that is something which requires a lot more of policy support, a lot more of policy alignment, and also investments at different levels. Enhancing funding for decentralized sanitation infrastructure, because as you know, sanitation and hygiene has to be at the level of household communities and at the local level, where the policy making investments can come at the national or global levels. Action and impact has to be at the local level. Improving groundwater governance through data and incentives, again, a very critical element of it in terms of our ability to capture whatever water resources are available, whether it is related to rainwater, whether it is related to managing the catchments, whether it is related to watershed management or wetland management, a lot of it. Certainly, the groundwater governance and the data incentive related work is something which is very, very critically important. And that's where a lot of policy making effort is now going on in terms of ensuring that the governance aspect of it is further strengthened at different levels. And importantly, as I mentioned before, leveraging digital technologies for smart water management. And in fact, on the other day, I was just flying in an Indian domestic airline called Indigo, and in the washroom they have a very interesting, a sticker that says, at 38,000 feet or 35,000 feet, this particular faucet uses 98% less water than on the ground. So certainly there are very interesting, interventions and technological options that are available. But the key point of it is not so much to look at what technology is available, but the scale of the technology and the scale of its deployment to have an impact on the ground. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned and the pathway to achieve SDG 6 by 2030 will definitely be to look at having the political will and strong institutions, increasing public awareness and behavioral change, monitoring data and accountability, regional cooperation on transboundary water management, and lastly and importantly, invest in innovation, resilience, and inclusivity. I think this is something which is going to be very critical. Next slide, please. I think that's probably my last slide.
There are no more slides here. This is
yes,
last.
Exactly. So that's what I said. So it's probably his last slide. So certainly a number of opportunities, a number of challenges. But then my sort of concluding remarks would be the following. One, in as much as we have the investments or the need for investments in technological interventions are growing, they should match with our ability to actually see the change on the ground. So if there is one critical intervention that several of us or all of us need to focus on, is that using the science and data available, using the policy spaces that are available or implementing a number of these things, using the investments that are available, the critical point is how do we bring about that behavioral change at the individual level so that collectively we will be able to see some impacts. It's just about 4 years from now that we will be coming up perhaps with yet another set of development goals with a different terminology. But then if the individual behavior does not change in the way we actually respond to some of these challenges or the way we are going to be managing these resources into the future, it's going to be a very, very important tick the box approach. But then to have an impact, it is going to be at the individual level. And that is why all of us need to play an important role in the puzzle. Not one of us will be able to solve these problems individually, but then our contributions are so very critical to achieve a big, larger global goal in terms of managing some of these resources. And the last point is for all of us to remember that even though we are divided by political boundaries and all that kind of a thing, we still need to understand water as a global common good. And so far we have that appreciation for it. Our ability to respond to some of these opportunities and challenges is going to be increased manifold. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Peshupati. We'll now have questions and comments from the audience. Roy Matthew has a question. Roy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Peshupati. That was indeed an enlightening presentation. My question was a bit specifically regarding the maintenance or updation of the wastewater reticulation systems in Indian cities. Since you mentioned that we do have some money and resources, currently our systems are based on disposal instead of recycling, and they are open loop. And they are largely centralized in cities, so that makes it difficult for the smaller drains to come and join to the bigger ones. So they ought to be decentralized. And there's also this problem that they are mostly built from concrete. So sulfate can actually crack the concrete, and it will react with aluminate, and it can crack the concrete, and it can cause leaks. And then there's also the problem with filter pores, because these wastewater particles are of different sizes. So if you put really small pores, it can affect the speed of the overall flow. And flow is really great because our cities are some of our cities are among the world's most populated. So since we do have some resources, are there any changes that we can actually implement in these cases? Because our cities, one thing that's generally said about our cities is that even though they have world-class infrastructure and all, the level of hygiene is lower when compared to cities in other nations. That was my question, sir.
Absolutely. I mean, you're spot on. So that's what I said. The thing is that a lot of investments are going into some of these. If you take, for example, the sewage treatment plants, if you take a number of those interventions that you mentioned. But the critical point of it is not to establish these infrastructures and say we have done it, but how do we actually maximize the return on investments and also make appropriate investments? And you mentioned about a couple of examples, concrete and all that kind of a thing. So the key challenge is, that is where I mentioned about the decentralization. That is where I mentioned about the need for a participatory approach to deal with it. Because I mean, today, as I mentioned in this particular conference that happened in Delhi, there was a very interesting mention that some of the sewage treatment plants, somebody mentioned that they switch off the treatment plant for some time to save electricity. And we were very baffled. I mean, they say, why are we creating an infrastructure if we want to save electricity and then defeat the entire purpose of having a treatment plant? I think it is actually a combination of our ability to understand that these investments are being made, but what is also important is to also focus on appropriate investments, both in terms of time and scale, but also maintenance of those investments. I think that is where we still have a bit of a challenge. We do make huge investments in creating infrastructure, but then certainly it is not backed up by the maintenance of some of these infrastructure, which, as all of us probably know, that it is more expensive than creating the infrastructure. I think that is where we should also focus on appropriate technologies which are relevant to the local conditions, and also appropriate maintenance or proper use of these investments that we are actually making. But all your points are well taken and spot on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishwanath.
Yeah. May I say something now? Hello.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead,
Yeah,
Professor
yeah.
Noor. Yes, please go.
Though I do not have any specific question on what Dr. Balakrishna has mentioned, most of the things what he said, they are very true and appropriate for the country context of India. NIRI has been doing a lot of work on SDGs 6 areas, and all the 8 targets and other things they have been targeted here. Sanitation is also a part of it. Wastewater treatment, which is my area of interest, we have been doing a lot of work for industrial wastewater treatment. We developed a lot of technologies. We have gone beyond controlling BOD, COD and addressing some specific organic pollutants. We mentioned like recalcitrant organic pollutants also. In fact, in Gujarat area, some of the common effluent treatment plants, they have adopted our technology, hydrodynamic cavitation, and replacing the biological system completely. Actually, wastewater being recalcitrant, it was not able to get treated by biological systems. So we needed to develop a technology which is called hydrodynamic cavitation, using oxidants as the supplementary oxidants there. Very good results. In fact, on the recommendation to High Court has asked 7 CETPs to adopt those technologies. So we have the good base of technology availability in the country for recalcitrant wastewaters, so that the standards can be met very well. So that is one aspect I would like to compliment. Secondly, considering the water, the water management issues and other things, I have always felt that untreated sewage, the quantum of untreated sewage mixing with river waters or lakes is really causing a serious problem of growth of kind of unwanted plantation in the lakes and other things. We have several lakes in Nagpur also. They are also almost covered with duckweed and kind of things. And it's becoming a nuisance now. Even after removal of those weeds, they very soon they regrow there and create problems. So a lot of investments are going into management of lakes only. And in Nagpur, a lot of reservoirs and lakes, they are the sources of drinking water. So that's one thing. And the sewage generated in Nagpur city with the intervention of NIRI and others, a lot of sewage, about 100 to 120 MLD sewage is being sold to nearby thermal power plant for use there in their cooling water systems. So reuse of treated sewage is also one of the aspects which is getting into now limelight with the industries. They are coming forward, and in fact they want more and more water. Like CPCL in Chennai is also using a lot of sewage generated in Chennai city. So like this, if the many cities come forward and make use of this treated sewage for their process purposes, with some more treatment they have to of course adopt in the plant before they use it, some kind of disinfection or some nutrient control, they have to do that. But overall, the scenario is now changing. Many industries are considering reuse, recycle as a good option to supplement their freshwater resources. Okay, so these are the things which are happening. And recently, Balakrishna ji, I would like to tell you, I was a part of CEO document preparation for textile supply chain. Actually, elimination of hazardous chemicals in the textile and fashion supply chains, which got Jeff funded project actually. Through UNIDO we have done it. And Ministry of Textiles was, of course, implementing agency there. And we found that a lot of inventory of chemicals is missing. Many industries, they do not share their inventory, if at all they have it. And we did not know what were the chemicals they were using. And for example, PFOS like chemicals or other things which they are using for making what you call outdoor clothing and other things. We don't know the quantity they are using. We needed to estimate it through other ways and using the literature values and other things. And we did what we call survey of 124 industries making use of such chemicals management and everything. We recommended some interventions to reduce the use of these chemicals and also replace production of those chemicals with safer alternatives. So these things are happening slowly. I think it will take some more time before other supply chains also accept these kind of changes in the things. Finally, after making all these changes, it should not impact the quality of the product. If that is done, the kind of value chain will be impacted. So many industries are skeptical before accepting this, but if they are convinced with proper technical and technological interventions, they would like to adopt it. And we are seeing that change happening in textile sector now, and we would like to move forward with a similar spirit with other supply chains also. So like you said, no, beat the plastic pollution and kind of things. The single plastics, though they are banned in Maharashtra also, they are still being in use actually in large quantities. The kind of failure of implementation is one of the things which is significantly seen. So though there are policies, there are government resolutions, everything, but on ground implementation is lacking. So local urban bodies, they have to gear up and seriously think about this, preventing the production and use of single-use plastics like things. So this is what I wanted to share, mostly to complement what you have said actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you. Very relevant points. And in fact, you mentioned about textiles. UNEP in India is the lead agency for all the UN agencies in India who actually work on textiles. We actually, chair that particular group. UNIDO is actually a sister UN agency working on it. But you are right, and that is why we actually are now creating, because in India, if you look at the clusters of textile manufacturers, we call them, the textile clusters. A number of clusters. There are about 16 different clusters that are there. We actually are now creating a cluster knowledge sharing mechanism, because not each cluster is focusing on everything. Some of them are focusing on water, some of them are focusing on energy, some of them are focusing on supply chain management. But now we actually are creating a pan-India coordination mechanism to bring the clusters together so that they can learn from each other. We're working closely with Ministry of Textiles and other ministries in terms of preparing a roadmap and also policy. But in terms of some of the other elements you mentioned, one of the initiatives that UNEP is supporting the Ministry of Water Resources, Jal Shakti, and other interested agencies is a new initiative that India, in fact, spearheaded and launched during the climate COP in Dubai. It's called the River Cities Alliance.
Yeah.
So we actually now have been requested by Government of India and the Ministry of Jal Shakti to help in terms of implementing elements of the River Cities Alliance. It started as a few countries coming together, but now it's actually grown into a global alliance where we are bringing experiences from other countries, but also taking India's experience in terms of a number of these things. But all your points are well taken. Thank you.
That's a wonderful initiative by UNEP India. and many ministries can be roped into the same activity. Actually, it is not just one ministry which is responsible. Commerce ministry also is responsible. Customs, we have to take into consideration. Several things are there, like you said, all SDGs, they are interconnected, and effort should also be in a way that there should be global effort, exchanging the knowledge generated in each sector, so that the overall improvements can be witnessed. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Rao. And if there are no more questions and comments from the audience, we will we can probably conclude today's session. And as a form of conclusion, may I extend our gratitude to Dr. Balakrishna Pushpati from the UNEP India, country head UNEP India, for accepting our invitation and for his wonderful presentation. Very timely and useful for us, and extremely relevant, and in many ways traversing that ground from policy to academia. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody in the audience, to Professor N. Rao for his detailed intervention as part of the talk. So thank you so much. Thank you to Professor Stacey Balkan, who we hope to listen to next up in the series. So thank you for joining, and thank you to everybody in the audience for joining, for their questions, comments, and so on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so
Professor
much.
Pushpati and Professor Balkan.
Thank you.
Thank you.